few days ago, I made a video talking about the Oldest View Dispersal, the newest part in the Oldest View series by KanePixels. I did what I usually do, but admittedly it was a bit rushed, and after thinking about it for a few days, I did have more thoughts on Dispersal that I wanted to add. Now, barring new information or another episode release, this will probably be my last Oldest View video until another part is released, or something major. I don't want it to seem like I'm milking the series, and only want to make videos on things if I have something to say about them. Something I said in my previous video was that I thought this newest part was less symbolic. After thinking about it, I disagree with that take now. It's going to be hard to explain why, because of the way I think this is done in a meta-narrative sense. It's definitely more my opinion, but I think it's a really cool idea. And it's just kind of complicated. But anyway, here we go. I believe most everything that I said in my previous video was accurate. This episode has obviously added more to the direct story of the Oldest View with the revival of Wyatt and the seeming possession of him by the Giant in some way. But it also has the message pretty directly that we lack knowledge about a lot of things, that our recorded history barely covers the existence of our own species, let alone knowing the rest of time and what's happened in it. But I think there's also more to it than that, and this is where things get odd in a meta-narrative sense. In my first few videos on the Oldest View series, I covered how I felt it represented the passing of time, things fading away into the past and being forgotten, as well as how our perception of things like art and places affects them. Like they have meaning because we see them and participate in them. The original, Mall and Giant both would not have existed without people and would not have been appreciated without people. Things made by us are appreciated by us and exist because we make them and appreciate them, and fade away as soon as we stop caring about them, or time passes and they become less relevant, etc., etc. I explain it better in those other videos, so you should watch them, but that's the sum of it here. This newest video, Dispersal, adds to this in an odd way. To me, it seemed at first to depart from the heavy symbolism of the first parts, opting instead to focus more heavily on the story of Wyatt and his dealings with these paranormal things that are at play within his version of our world. Or at least that's what I thought at first, before I let it roam around in my mind a bit more. If we go back to Part 3, The Rolling Giant, it of course featured Wyatt dying, and then both him and the Giant are seen black and white in the forest above, or at least what we thought was the forest above. From a story perspective, it seems that Wyatt dying is also the end of the Giant in some way. From a symbolism perspective, Wyatt's death also ends his remembrance of the Giant and the things that happened in this weird underground place. He experienced it, he dies, and thus he is the only one that has a memory of it, and so it dies with him. So we have two ways to look at the series in that sense. The literal story and the subtextual story that's trying to impart meaning upon us. In Dispersal, the literal story is that something, some entity or paranormal power, brings back Wyatt or gives him a second chance, but at the cost that the Giant seems to leave that place with him and is connected to him in some way. This is represented at the end when we hear the Giant's wheels rolling, speeding down the streets. In my opinion, this is supposed to be like the Giant is in the car with Wyatt, not literally, more like it's in his head or in his body or something like that. It's kind of hard to explain, but I think you get what I'm getting at. Now, here's where things get complicated. Dispersal is also literally about the real-world Giant and the Oldest View as a series itself and our consumption of it and our perception of it. Again, if we go back to the first 3 episodes, the first episode was called Renewal, and that title had a double meaning. Part of that meaning was Kevin Obregon renewing Julian Reverchon through the creation of an artistic sculpture commemorating him. But it was also the renewal of the sculpture itself, the memory of the sculpture, even removed from that context, being shown to us by KanePixels. Of course, there's all the implications that this is a statue of Julian Reverchon and all of that, but it's more of an idea of the Giant itself being renewed. The whole series is about life and death and memories and forgetting and how we interact with things, and a piece of art and a public place in the public conscious is part of that. Dispersal also has a double meaning like this, but like a double meaning. In the literal story of Dispersal, the Giant is seemingly brought back by some type of paranormal force that attaches it to Wyatt, and so it gets to leave that area. But in a subtextual storytelling way, our perception of the Giant as well as Wyatt is what brings them back. We are aware of the Mall, and we are aware of the Giant, despite most of us have never seen them are been there in our real life. Our real world awareness of the Oldest View as a series is what the title Dispersal means. The ideas of the Giant and the Mall and Wyatt and all of this have been dispersed to us as we've perceived it by watching it on YouTube. Just as literally the Giant's spirit in the story or whatever it is has been dispersed to the world that Wyatt inhabits. So, subtextually, Dispersal is about the Giant being known once again by the public as a piece of art. The piece of art that it is being spread to us by KanePixels video. The memory of the Valley View Central Mall is as well, and the gallery that was housed there. It is being dispersed to us, despite having it basically been fallen into obscurity previously. And then the subtext marries the literal story, the contextual story. Us knowing about the Giant and knowing about the Mall is what brings them back. Maybe not in the actual literal story. There is an implication in the story that something within the world of the Oldest View is of course paranormal, and I do think the subtext story is separate from that inner story. Even Kane himself said so in that interview I mentioned in my ultimate Oldest View analysis.
There is still a more material story running alongside here, like Wyatt. Like all the things that happened with Wyatt and whatnot, that is still a beyond just theme. Those are actual characters and stakes and everything. So that does exist, but it's not the point, I guess.
But, you know, in a story like this, the subtextual meaning and the contextual meaning go hand in hand. They're both happening at the same time. And I just think that's really a cool idea. The fact that subtextually, us knowing about the Giant is part of what brings it back to life within the series. And then out of that, there is something else, the greater paranormal thing. So you have this, like, understanding of what is trying to be said, while also knowing there is something within the story that we don't know about, that Kane is devising, and that's really cool. Of course, all of this is just my thoughts on the series. This could be what Kane is getting at, it could be just my own insane interpretation, but I think it's a really neat idea. Now, moving on from the subtextual storytelling, I also wanted to talk about the literal storytelling and what could be going on there. I am interested to see in the future how this tale will go. What is this light in this entity? What are the Mall and the Giant themselves? Are they separate? Are they bound together by something else? Is there some type of deity at play bringing the Giant along? Some type of ancient thing representing things forgotten? What is that forest? Like, why is that forest underground? Is that like a shadow of the forest from the past? Is it like literally a dimension where forgotten things and places go that happen to intersect with ours for just a moment? How is the Giant, like, possessing Wyatt? Is it just kind of attached to him in a sort of way as a passenger, like I said before? What does that structure from Life of a Giant mean? Is that like some type of monolith dedicated to the deity that is represented by the Giant? It's all really neat to kind of think about that kind of stuff. Even though it is also fun to dig into the idea and the meaning of the series, it's also fun to just think about, like, ooh, ghosts and paranormal stuff. And also, to clear things up from the previous video, I don't know if I literally mean that Wyatt is possessed as in the Giant is controlling him. It seems that the Giant isn't controlling him, but is attached to him in some way, like inside of him, but more as like a passenger, which is why I said that before. When I said that the Giant is in the car, I don't mean like literally. I mean that the Giant is as a spiritual being either inside of Wyatt's head in some way or like attached to him and following him around. That's why I've referred to him as a passenger so many times. And I'm really interested to see if there are more parts, if that's going to go somewhere, or if this really is the final part. And of course, on that other subtext, the idea of the fact that we don't know a lot about history and there's things that we don't know about is just really ominous, and it's kind of looming over the story now with that really spooky song. Which, by the way, Kane uploaded that song to his secondary YouTube channel, and I learned about that thanks to a comment on that previous video, and I'm going to link that song in the description. The song is called Jebel Irhoud. This is a direct reference to an archaeological site by the same name in Morocco, where it seems that the earliest of our ancestors had been discovered, like their bones there. These bones are 300,000 years old, and that's what this part is referencing. It's the idea that we have been around as we are for like 300,000 years, and our history only covers like 5,000 of those years. And, you know, things that even happened before that that didn't relate to our direct descendants. Dinosaurs and other strange things. It's very spooky to think about how we don't know much about our own world and the world's history and the history of our own species besides this big chunk of history. 5,000 years is a long time from a single lifetime, but from the vast majority of history and time. It is such a small flash in the pan. It's just neat to know that the first 3 parts are about like history and death and how memories fade and how people experiencing things is like what gives them life, and this part is about that, but kind of continued. Like, yeah, we experience arts and places, and now we know about them, and in a meta-narrative sense, we've brought them back to life, and that's really cool to think about. On that note, if you like horror with a historical slant, I'd actually recommend reading the book It by Stephen King. It's one of the most popular horror books ever, so you've probably been recommended it before. I say the book specifically because it covers a lot of things that the movies don't, about how parts of history is forgotten by people because it's only remembered by people and spread by word of mouth. And of course, there's all the other stuff about the scary clown guy, but I really like that historical aspect too. So, to finish up, I'm excited about the future of the series. I like that as a series, it's complicated enough that I had to think even more about it and wanted to make a second video. It just means that it's got enough density and things going on that I have these thoughts. And again, unless I have another burst of thoughts about it or another episode or big piece is released soon, which I think is very unlikely, this will be the last video on the Oldest View for a while, so I hope you liked it. If you did, leave a like and a comment, because one day we'll all be forgotten to time. Oh, time, the cruelest killer of all. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, of course, Wyatt escaped, and the path that he took out up those stairs was different, and I got a comment that was kind of funny that was like, yeah, of course, it's different. This is a completely different path. And I was like, oh, you're right. I'm dumb. I'm dumb sometimes, but I also do think that's interesting. This doesn't really fit with the overall rest of my analysis, but that door disappearing away into the back in a way that seems to be like the mall kind of disappearing or separating from our world in a sense is really cool. But also in a more physical sense, the fact that there were 2 ways to get in or out of that ghost mall, it's really cool and still makes me think about that door in that little room and what it means and what these long staircases are, besides really awesome references to horror like Silent Hill. It's probably just a door to the past, like a portal to a forgotten place, which is why it's so decrepit and scary, but I love it. I love that symbology there. Oh, and one last thing, which is if you enjoyed the song Jebel Earhood by KanePixels, check out the song 13 Angels Standing Guard Round Your Bedside by Silvermount Zion. It's like that in that weird moany way, but less creepy and more sad. And one last thing, check out the book How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino. The movie The Boy and the Heron is based off of the book, but it's really nothing alike. It's a fantastic book, and it talks about a lot of the same topics that are covered in this video in The Oldest View, but more in an uplifting sense and less in a horror sense. If you've seen the movie The Boy and the Heron by Hayao Miyazaki, it is very different than the book that it is based on. They are both good, it's just they are completely separate works of art. The book How Do You Live is definitely more of a slice of life and just trying to make you think about like what it is to be a human and stuff, and I love stuff like that. Anyway, I'm GhostsOnHoliday, and remember that everything's going to be okay. Someone out there loves you, even if that someone is the demon that lives under your floorboards and peeks between them to watch you brush your teeth at night. Good night, fair listener, or good morning, or good day. Hopefully, not for the last time.
Fuck! My ankles are broken! My ankles are broke!
His ankles are broken!
Broken ankles!
Keep it true!
I got broken ankles!
He's coming, Carl!